It's just so everyone can get into the webinar live here. So we're joined by Kate Hilton this evening for our author event, and we will get started in about a minute or so. If you'd like, you can type in the chat box, let us know where you're coming from tonight. I'm Courtney and I'm from Huntsville, so I'd like to see, be fun where everyone's joining us from. Hello from Toronto. Bracebridge, Huntsville, yay. Port Carling, lovely.
Muskoka Lakes Public Library. Hi, Muskoka Lakes Public Library. I love that library. I've been going there since I was a little one. Yeah.
That's fun. White and Gravenhurst and Lake of Bays, another one from Huntsville.
So nice.
Fun.
You guys have had such a beautiful winter up there. My parents have been near Port Carling for the last year, just living up there. And I keep getting these spectacular pictures of what a stunning winter you've had. Hello, Monica Carr. Nice to see you. Lovely. Yes, there are lots of folks who had the good fortune to decamp from Toronto up north during this strange year. Yeah, including my mom and dad. So yeah,
And
I'm looking forward to getting back up there myself when vaccines permit.
Excellent. I'm just looking, it looks like our numbers have stopped going up. So we will get started just so we have enough time to get through our lovely event this evening. So I'm just going to close out the chat box. Thank you for letting us know where you're coming from. So welcome to our collaborative author event this evening. And we have bestselling author Kate Hilton with us. And this event would not be possible without contributions by the many Muskoka libraries as well as HarperCollins this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Courtney LeGros, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at Huntsville Public Library. And tonight I'll be moderating the event with Kate Hilton. As our commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation promise and process, we begin this event by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Chippewa and the Ojibwe peoples. We recognize the historic and present contributions to our province and country of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So some general housekeeping for tonight. We are using the webinar platform of Zoom, which might be a little bit different than you're used to. You can't hear or see anybody other than Kate or myself. Your microphones are muted as well. Your videos are muted. So it's just us on the screen tonight. When we get to the point where we want to ask questions, at the very bottom of your screen, there's a little thing that says Q&A. You can type your questions down there and hopefully we can get to them depending on how many we have tonight, but I'll do my best to get through them and give them to Kate, and we'll see where we get when we get to the Q&A. We'll be together for about an hour this evening, and Kate's going to kick us off with a short reading and a chat, followed by a discussion between Kate and I while I'll ask her a few questions and we'll get to know her a little bit better. And then we'll turn it over to you, the audience, for your questions. So let's get started, shall we? Before Kate settled on writing fiction, you had a law in career. You had university education experience, publishing, major gift fundraising, and while you rarely use those today, you are delighted that your English degree has turned out to be so useful. So are we. Your nonfiction writing has appeared in the National Post, Canada Living, and the Huffington Post on topics ranging from motherhood to creativity, and of course, reinvention, which is very, very key in this book. You are also an experienced media contributor, appearing on Breakfast Television, CBC Early Edition, Global Morning, CTV, and other local regional shows. Kate lives in a blended family with her husband, 2 sons, a stepdaughter, and a rescue dog, all in Toronto. Kate's the best-selling author of The Hole in the Middle, Just Like Family, and her latest book, which we'll be discussing tonight, Better Luck Next Time. Kate, I'm so happy to welcome you back this evening. We've had the pleasure of interviewing you before at our Books and Brunch, and it's not often that I get to revisit conversations and get the gift of just hanging out with another amazing person 2 times in a lifetime. So welcome to our event this evening.
What a nice thing to say. Thank you. I'm very touched. This is, I think, my last event of this particular book tour, which has been, of course, entirely digital. And this is a really nice one for me to end on because I absolutely love all of these Northern libraries. And it's so nice that you guys are collaborating on these events this year. Some of my favorite events have been going around to different Northern libraries, and I've always had such a warm welcome from all of you. So this is a treat for me. Okay, so I thought what I would do is, because many of you have actually heard me speak before, and I'm very happy to, I normally just do a little talk about how I became a writer, and I think some of you have probably heard that spiel before. So I'm gonna do, I'll do a little reading. I'll tell you a little bit about what I've been up to more recently, and then, but please feel free to ask me any questions you like about my writing process or publishing process or my journey as a writer. I just don't want to bore people by saying the same thing you've heard me say before. So don't be shy to ask me any questions if I don't talk about something that you wanted to know more about. But otherwise, I'll sort of try to keep it a little more current. Okay, so this book, this is my third novel. It's a book that is I'm very fond of this book. I mean, you love all your books. They're like children. They all have like their, little quirks about them. They all have their little struggles that make you love them all the more. This one is really born out of an experience of really having to reinvent my life in a variety of ways in my 40s. And I became just very interested in that process of reinvention and transformation and transition in kind of the midlife years, however loosely you want to define them, in a variety of ways, because not only was I having some interesting, profound life transitions, but almost everyone I knew in my sort of cohort was also, in a variety of ways, marriage, health, career, children, and just kind of how all of those transitions sort of speak to identity and how we sort of maybe come out of those processes thinking a little bit differently about who we are in the world. So that's kind of the theme at the nub of this book. Structurally, it has 3 distinct points of view. It takes 3 members of an extended family, all women. So the 3 points of view are Zoe, who is a PR executive. She is, at the beginning of the book, when you meet her, just exiting a marriage that disappointed her and trying to figure out sort of what her life is going to look like now. She's, I would say, as a sort of a type, she is someone who has always had a plan, and life has always gone according to plan. And so for her, that transition is about trying to figure out, if you've always had plans and then suddenly all of those plans go up in smoke, how do you go forward? If that whole planning system has broken down, how do you start to approach your future? So that's Zoe, and she's the voice you're going to hear in this reading. Then she has a cousin named Mariana, who's a journalist who's quite disaffected in terms of her relationship with journalism, and who is a woman who's had, late in life twins, and so who's really still in the trenches of very young children despite being in her 40s. And then her sister, also Zoe's cousin Beata, who is much more of kind of an organic, holistic type of person. She's a craniosacral therapist. She's really kind of interested in mind-body things. She's a bit like more woo-woo than I personally am. She has been a single mother most of her adult life. She has a teenage son. She had a child very early. So she has a teenage son who is starting to ask some serious questions about his parentage, wanting to find his dad, wanting to know who his dad is. And that is a hugely disruptive thing for Beata's kind of worldview, which has always been just about sort of this world of two. Okay, so that's you'll meet all of those characters, I think, in this chapter, but from Zoe's point of view. So the book opens, Zoe is arriving at her mother's house for Christmas dinner, and it's utter chaos. And in a way, we used to dread these family gatherings, and now, of course, we feel terrible nostalgia for them and would absolutely love to be in a chaotic, aggravating, huge, multi-generational family meal. But that was, of course, not what I was thinking when I wrote this, so bear with me. All right, so here we are. Zoe rolls up to Christmas dinner. She's late, and she can feel the vibration of chaos behind the door to her mother's house. The door swings open before she can ring the bell, revealing her brother, Zach, wearing a parka. "Tig," he says. "You're it. I'm going for a smoke." "Zoe," Judy Hennessy pulls her daughter into her arms. "Where's Richard?" "He's at his mother's," says Zoe. It has taken 30 seconds for her to start lying, which, while not unprecedented, gives her a sense of foreboding. "See you soon," says Zach, heading down the front steps. "Don't be long," Judy calls after Zach's retreating figure, and then closes the door, trapping Zoe in a building with all the rest of her living blood relatives. "I thought Richard was coming here this year," says Judy. "Oh, he wanted to." "If he'd wanted to, he would have. I have to say, Zoe, I think it's hurtful that Richard always prioritizes his own family. He knows how much I love Christmas." "Everyone knows how much you love Christmas," says Zoe's father, Larry. He gives Zoe a kiss on the cheek. "Or," suggests Zoe, "we could consider the possibility that it's not about you." "Mom, do you need help in the kitchen?" asks Zoe. The energy in the room is rising, and not in an uplifting way. She feels the need to chop something, carve something. "Yes, I certainly do," says Judy. "I'm delegating the living room to you, Lydia." Her tone suggests that she's not sure Lydia is up to the job. In the early days of Larry and Judy's courtship, Lydia expressed disappointment that her brother had fallen for a woman without professional ambitions or feminist convictions. Judy's quiet fury still burns after almost 50 years. Zoe stands. There's a knock at the door. "I'll get it," she says. "And I'll be right with you, Mom." She opens the door for Zach. "You came back," she says. "I'm not sure I would have made the same choice." "How's Richard?" he asks, removing his coat. "Oh, he's fine. He went to his cousin's for dinner." "Oh, you said he went to his mother's." "He drove his mother to his cousin's house." "You might want to get your story straight." "And you might want to mind your own business." "Then again," says Zach, "I might not." "Is anyone going to help with this dinner?" Judy shouts from the kitchen. "She means you," says Zach. Zoe doesn't bother to disagree with him. Producing festive meals is a form of martyrdom reserved for the women in her family. Her father at least has his own version. Larry has been known to mow the lawn at high noon in July, and he's burned, sliced, and impaled himself doing home repairs that no one of his age and skill level should attempt alone. Judy's suffering waxes and wanes with the seasons, reaching peak intensity around holiday meals, particularly those with too many guests and too many courses. It's a tribulation that cannot evidently be borne alone. It is to be shared, ideally with the daughter. "How are we doing?" Zoe asks, entering the maternal sanctuary. "It will be a miracle if this meal hits the table before 9, says Judy. "A miracle." "'Tis the season." "Your father worked his fingers to the bone his whole life. The least I can do is give him a lovely Christmas dinner." Zoe and her mother have this conversation every year. It is their nativity pageant. "Zach's fingers work fine too," Zoe says, reciting her lines by rote. "Zachary has been working himself into a state of exhaustion for months. He needs some peace and quiet." "Zach's been in rehab, Mom." "It was a wellness retreat, and why would you bring that up on Christmas?" "Do we have a moratorium on the truth at Christmas?" "Is it so much to ask that we could have a nice time?" A nice time, as defined by Judy Hennessy, is a period in which the entire family jettisons reality and pretends that everyone is doing as well as Judy has told their friends they're doing. Zoe wonders if perhaps her mother is onto something. What if she and Zach aren't trying hard enough to imagine their perfect lives into being? What if their personal catastrophes are fundamental failures of the imagination? Or maybe everyone is just this screwed up, but better than they are at staying on message. No, says Zoe. It's not so much to ask. She puts her head down and an hour passes in chopping and basting and stirring and seasoning. Her mind wanders to Richard. She doesn't miss him exactly. It's impossible to miss Richard at Christmas because Richard has always been a complete pill at family holidays. And if he were here, Zoe knows, she would be in the kitchen worrying about whether he was enjoying himself in the living room, or else she'd be in the living room trying to pacify him while worrying about her mother working unassisted in the kitchen. No, she doesn't miss those Christmases. She misses the Christmases she's never had. She's homesick for a life that has never existed, a life in which she's married to a man who buys her stupid gifts that reference charming in-jokes between them, who wears ugly Christmas sweaters and passes the hors d'oeuvres, and helps Mariana's kids assemble their ear-splittingly loud plastic toys and watches stupid YouTube videos with her nephew Oscar, who says, "All I want for Christmas is you," and means it. Zoe misses the Christmases when she doesn't have to tell her mother she's getting a divorce, which represents every Christmas, real or imagined, except this very one, right here and now. Are you and Richard having problems, Judy asks. Why would you ask that? Why would she? Zoe has been careful to tell only her closest friends, a group that does not include any family members other than Mariana, about the ongoing saga of her marriage. Has Mariana been indiscreet? You are, aren't you? Why are we talking about this now? Isn't the turkey ready? Forget the turkey, says Judy. It is a statement with the force of an explosion. Judy Hennessy has never in her entire life uttered the words, forget the turkey. Mom, says Zoe, this isn't the time. People are waiting. That's not an answer. Look, things with Richard are not ideal, but let's focus on the dinner right now, okay? How close are we, asks Larry, coming into the kitchen. Mariana's kids may turn feral if we don't get some food on the table. Then grab an oar, says Judy. Do you think this dinner will get on the table all by itself? Larry looks surprised, justifiably in Zoe's opinion, and begins backing out of the room. I'll get your brother, he says to Zoe, disappearing through an archway as she says, please don't. What's going on in here, says Zach, materializing instantly. Zach has an obvious talent for generating and participating in scenes of family dysfunction. It's tempting to blame this propensity on his recent immersion in the television industry, but he's been stirring the Hennessy pot since childhood. Absolutely nothing, says Zoe, filling his arms with serving bowls. Make yourself useful. Take these out to the table. Zoe and Richard are having problems, says Judy. You don't say, says Zach, putting bowls down on the kitchen counter. You don't say what, says Larry, coming back in. Dad, says Zoe urgently, we need to carve the turkey. The carving set is over there, along with the platter. On it, he says, removing his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves. We're 5 minutes away, Lydia, Zoe says. Why don't you call everyone to the table and get them seated? Isn't Richard coming? Asks Lydia. He's at his cousin's house, says Zoe. I thought he was at his mother's house, says Zach in an extraordinarily loud stage whisper. It is pure instinct that drives her arm up and behind her shoulder and then forward with velocity, the instinct of a natural athlete or an animal under attack. The ladle is an extension of her arm until she releases it, and then it is an entity unto itself, hurtling through space, no longer obeying the commands of whatever primitive part of Zoe's brain has set this scene in motion. The ladle spirals up through the air, ascending to a point well above Zach's head, and then begins a spectacular arc downwards that terminates abruptly in the middle of Uncle Marvin's forehead. Zoe, says Judy, rushing over to Marvin. How old are you, for God's sake? Zach's laugh rises over the general din. Better luck next time, he says.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that's the scene that you chose to read because it's the first one in the book and it just really sets the stage for this whole novel. I want to talk a little bit about the characters in that scene and maybe not all of them because there really are a lot of characters.
I was doing an interview with someone else who said it was like the ultimate hold your beer scene for a writer, which is like, I'm going to introduce all the characters in the first scene.
Yeah, in the first scene, like,
you know,
we don't get to be introduced to any of them. We know we're listening to Zoe's point of view here. I mean, we've got flying ladles, we've got screaming twins, we've got an angsty teenager, and it's just chaos in that house. And it really took me a while to sort through the who's who of that Hennessy clan. But once I did, I mean, I was invested. I wanted nothing but the best to happen for all of these people. You think that, it's about this chaotic family, but really it's not. It's about the individuals. And I want to know, was it your intention from the very beginning to create so many unique characters? Or did this story sort of take on a life of its own once you started writing it?
So my experience with all of my books, and it's a fun question to answer because I'm actually about to start the second draft of my fourth, is that the secondary characters really come to life in the second and third draft. That sort of when you write the first draft, you're really working with a handful of characters and a story arc, right? And the first draft is really about getting all of those people where they need to be from A to B, right? But then I find that as you spend more time in the story and the secondary characters are given a little bit of room to breathe because you're not as sort of instrumental about them. Like there isn't a place where they have to go, right? But you have more time to sit with them and figure out, like, why are they in the book? What are they doing here? What are they telling us? Because they're there for a reason, right? What are they telling me about the characters that they're interacting with? And then you get way more of those kind of more intimate scenes with the secondary characters. And so I would say that in the second draft, there are two characters that are very, I think, important in the end to the book, who maybe three that really start to kind of fill their lungs. And one is Zach, who's Zoe's brother. One is Lydia, who's the matriarch of one side of the family, who's a feminist icon. And the other is Oscar, who's the teenage son. And each of those, I think, that sort of triangle of secondary characters as the book went on, I really came to have huge affection for those characters and give them a lot more space, even though they're not kind of the principal actors of the story.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm reading this book, and I've read all of your books, and Zoe and Will are they're crossover characters a little bit.
That's right. They are, yeah.
Make an appearance in one of the first books. So it's really interesting to have this story from Zoe's perspective, and in sort of was it your intention to always write just Zoe and Will, or sort of filled in the rest of them around that book?
Yeah, so like a few different things happen when you're writing a book, which is, at least for me, I write a book over a period of time. And so different things start to fill in. So as I say, the first draft is just the story arc, the sort of like main story arc. And initially, yeah, I mean, I wanted to do a book about these life transitions. And Zoe and Will were sort of the central love story, right? So I had them from the beginning. And you're right to observe that they're from an earlier book, and actually it ties into what I said about secondary characters. They were secondary characters in my first book that started to kind of really have more of a life as the book went on. And they weren't kind of the main characters, but I wasn't quite done with them. And in particular, Will Shannon, I've written, I've written a lot since I last spent time with Will, but I kind of thought I wasn't quite done with him. Like I just wanted to check in and see how he was doing. What was he up to? What happened to him after the hole in the middle? And so it was really fun to bring him back and get to spend more time with him as a character and think about him a bit more and give him more depth, because of course he, without wanting to do too many spoilers, like he finds out that he has a son, right? That he didn't know he had. And that's a big part of his kind of growth as a character and thinking about who he is in the book. So, yeah. So I guess I'd say I started with that as kind of a central love story, but then I just became interested in there were lots of other things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about, as I said earlier, different types of life transitions that happen. And I wanted to talk a little bit about having having kids in the teenage years and the transition of parenting that happens. And so, although Beata is a character who intuitively I kind of feel like I don't have as much in common with, she's not as much. I know many people like her, but it's not as much like me, But I'm raising teenage sons, and so that piece for Beata, that was my way into Beata, was understanding, how challenging that is to try to, particularly as a single mother, to try to figure out, like, what does that mean to be raising young men, as a single mother. And it was very much, something I was spending a lot of time worrying about myself, and so that part of the story came in. And then, of course, it's been such a period of turmoil as I was writing the book for, women's marches and other social justice movements. And I just kind of got interested in what it would be like to have a matriarch who was um, a really important person attached to a social justice movement, and who had a certain kind of fame and a certain kind of perspective, and how that might dribble down in a family where everyone's identified as a feminist, for example, in this case, but differently through different generations, and how each person kind of plays that identity out, and how complex it is to have a famous parent, no matter who that famous parent is or what they believe in. Even if you're kind of aligned with their politics, it's a complex thing. Big shadow. So all of those, there are lots of different pieces that kind of show up in the book that are all kind of curiosities and intellectual preoccupations, and yeah.
That's fun. Speaking of famous people, I heard recently that this book actually you sold the TV rights for it.
Yes, that's true.
Very big congratulations. That's
Oh,
obviously a
thank
really fun
you.
thing. Do you think it's going to be a hard thing? Like, do you have to let this go and you go into TV, or do you want to have a hand in it, or are you okay just letting somebody take your baby and run with it?
Well, certainly at this stage, I just, I just let it go. I mean, the chance of it actually being made, right? Let many things get optioned, and far fewer things get made. And I did have this, I had this very fun experience. And even if nothing else ever happens, I'll tell you, I had this like peak experience that I'll share with you, because I haven't had like so many moments in my life of being like, feeling like, wow, I'm cool. But this was it. So I had gone away with my husband for a little like mini break, and I was sitting in a warm place by a pool, and my agent had called me, and she said, like, look, there's this producer who is really interested in your book, but she wants to talk to you. I was like, sure, why not? I don't have anything going on this week. I'll be out of town, but yeah, like, here's my number, have her call me. So I'm literally sitting by a pool in a bathing suit, right? And I get this call, and it's this wonderful woman who's really interesting and lively, and we have this great chat, and she's telling me all about the how excited she is about my book, and how much she'd like to option it. I'm like, that sounds great. Yeah, I would love you to option it. I think this conversation is going really well. And then she starts telling me that she works for this company that used to be a talent agency, and they're sort of migrating over to doing their own production, but they're using all of their people. So the sort of concept behind their company is they use their people in it. And then she says to me, and I think Jane Fonda would be spectacular as Lydia, who's the feminist icon. And I was like, I do too. I just thought, probably there's a very small percentage chance of anything happening. But right now I'm sitting by a pool, and a producer's talking to me about the fact that she thinks Jane might be interested in my book. And I just thought, you know what? That's all. I don't need any more. Everything else is gravy. This is cool peak experience. This is gonna keep me warm for a long
I'm
time.
picturing you in like big sunglasses and a floppy
100%.
sun hat, just
Yeah.
talking on the phone.
Like I do it all the time. Like it's what I do.
I love it. That's amazing. So, I mean, you yourself, you were a lawyer, and you've got that law background, and there are two main characters. Well, one main character and sort of another
Yes.
secondary character that are
Yep.
lawyers.
Yep.
Did you find that you had a particular affinity, especially for Will, who's a lawyer? Is that why you were so fond of writing him? Is there any similarities between you, and do we see any juicy real life stories in there?
Ah, does this have a juicy real life story in it? So I usually like have a little Easter egg in all of my books just for myself of like one thing that actually happened to me. Oh, and this one is a blind date. So I did have like a really bizarre blind date, not exactly like the one in the book, but when I was dating after my divorce, I had a few like online dating experiences that were really peculiar. So I put one into the book. But no, I've had a lot of careers, to be honest with you. So, and I like to know that when I'm writing, I like to be realistic in my work scenes because I find often it's a pet peeve of mine that writers who have often not worked in a lot of kind of traditional jobs, they kind of get it wrong. Like I find like when writers write about the workplace, it sometimes just doesn't feel right to me because I've worked in a lot of workplaces. So I try really hard to get my workplace comedy right, and so I usually draw on workplaces that I've spent time in, like law or university or publishing or an adjacent field, right? So journalism isn't a real far stretch for me. Although I have some very good friends who are journalists and talk to them a little bit about life in the newsroom. But law offices are easy, right? I've spent lots of time in law offices. I didn't work as a lawyer for a long time, but I worked long enough to get it. And then I was married to a lawyer for a long time. I have a lot of lawyer friends. I've spent a lot of time in law offices. So, yeah, so that world is really accessible for me. And yeah, and I like lawyers. Like I'm friends with a lot of lawyers, and I think one of the things about legal education is it kind of there's a quality to it, like many professional educations, where you actually have a sense of your brain being rewired because you're being taught to think like a lawyer, think like a doctor, whatever. Um, so that any new problem that comes, you can't learn everything about being a lawyer, right? But you can learn how to think like a lawyer so that any case that crosses your desk, you'll be able to reason through it like a lawyer, right? So you do kind of join a club of people who've joined the Borg, right? Whose brains have all been rewired to think like lawyers. And so when you get a group of lawyers together, even if you have very little else in common, you have a lot in common. I remember I took my current husband, who is not a lawyer, to my law reunion, and he was like, "It's like a whole room full of people exactly like you." And I was like, "What are you talking about? They're nothing like me. I mean, we're all so different." He's like, "No, you're exactly the same." It's like 80 people here, and you're the same, and it's really weird. So yeah,
That's like when,
so I
yeah.
do like my lawyer characters. I have a fondness for them. Yes.
I think there's a scene, I'm going to go off script for a minute, but there's a scene in the lawyer book where Zoe is kind of finalizing her divorce, or in the process of finalizing her divorce. And, it's this long, just drawn out, exhausting process. And the lawyer kind of says, it's basically the last man standing, whoever can wait it out longest. And Zoe thinks, can I go get a coffee? And she's like, well, your ex-husband's got a yoga mat in there. And I was like a laugh out loud scene of ridiculousness of like how funny this horrible event can actually be for people.
Well, they say that tragedy plus time equals comedy. And I think there's something to that, right? I did go through a divorce. It was horrible. But,
Yeah.
it
You're
is
on the other side now, right?
right.
You kind of look back.
There's a certain absurdity to this. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, when I did law, I did quite a bit of family law, and it is just kind of this, yeah, there's lots of gallows humor to be found in the family bar for sure. Yeah.
So I want to shift gears just a tiny little bit, and I want to chat about you. And not that I didn't love this book, because I could talk about it all night, but there was a really interesting article that I read from you, which from a really long time ago, actually, it was from 2014. So we're going digging back in the archives here.
Yeah.
But I think it's really relevant today because you talk about work-life balance, which comes up a little bit in some of your other books, and this one too. And you said we'd all be better off if we could just ditch the idea that there's a mythical state of balance out there, that others have succeeded in achieving it. They haven't. We are all trying to find the right combination of rest, action, family, work, ambition, acceptance, and of engagement with and retreat from the world. Some days we get it right and we feel like a superwoman, and other days we get it wrong and we feel like a dismal failure. When I read that, I thought, you could have written this in last month. This could have been something that we were talking about today in terms of this work-life balance and this overused phrase. I'm curious if you could take that and put it into context for us today. Do you still feel the same way? What does your writing process look like now? I know in the past you've gone to your parents' cottage to write, and that's not an option. So what does it look like for you at home when you're doing this next draft, when you're trying to balance it all, kids, teenage kids, families, dogs? How does that look for you?
That's a great, thank you for that question. And thank you. It's been a long time since I heard those words that I wrote, and I still completely agree with them. In my first book, I was very preoccupied with that sort of central question, which was this idea of having it all, the myth of having it all, and what kind of magical, mystical content people in my particular generation, which is X, kind of thought having it all would contain, right? Like we all sort of came in going, well, I'm going to have it all. And then everyone sort of thought I have like all is crushing me. Like I have all of everything and I think I'm going to die from it. And that was sort of what I wrote my first book about, which if you haven't read is a fun book. I know you've read it, Courtney, but it's also a fun book, and it's about that particular dilemma. So I think, I do think it's really, it's sort of a midlife problem. It's that moment in time where, and I think men struggle with this too, although I think women struggle with it in my generation more, because they are wearing, I think, expectations on a variety of fronts that men aren't in the same way. So there's an expectation of real professional success, and sort of into these middle years feeling like that, you really want to be climbing that ladder. Those are the years where you start to see people kind of separate out from the pack. And if you're a having it all person, you're like, I want that promotion, I want to take that more on, so that I can be, so that I can have those really senior positions that women should have and that I've been trained to have. And at the same time, the kids, whatever people have told you about little kids being harder than big kids, this is not true. So, every stage is very demanding, and in some ways teenagers are the most demanding of all. And so there's sort of that realization that your kids are actually getting to be harder, not easier, right? And then meanwhile, you may have aging parents. You may also be trying to do scads of volunteer work, and you're also trying to kind of, do self-care, whatever that means to you. But of course, you're being told all the time, but like, are you doing your self-care? And that's time consuming too. And so you look at your schedule, and it seems kind of really oppressive. And yeah, I to some extent leaned out of all of that. So when I around 2014, I left a full-time job that I'd been working for a long time in major gift fundraising. My kids needed a huge amount. I got divorced. So all of that happened sort of simultaneously. And I came home to write full time and raise my kids, and as a single parent. And so that was a huge shift in my life, but it also gave me a real opportunity to kind of look at what I really wanted to spend my time on and what I didn't. Now, of course, that quickly got out of hand because that's what we're trained to do. So if you'd caught me before the pandemic, I was doing 20 million things. I'm in training to be a psychotherapist, so I'm in school. I'm working on 2 other book projects. I was promoting this book project, still raising the children, got remarried, did all these things. So busy life. The pandemic, I find, has kind of returned me back to that moment in 2014 where I interestingly had that exact thought process, which was, let's streamline this. Let's look again at what actually matters, because, I don't want to be exhausted all the time. And, I want to make sure the things I'm really striving for are the things I really care about. So And then meanwhile, the kids get older and their needs change again. So, I have a stepdaughter going to university next year, God willing, and a son who's going to his final year of high school. So, all of these stages, the preoccupations are sort of fleeting in a sense. The landscape is always shifting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's kind of like reading a book over again at a different point in your life, and you always get something new out of it. And sometimes it's
Absolutely.
just it's that great reset, or you look at it with a different perspective. So it's kind of nice to go back to those old works and say, well, how does this apply to today? And do I still believe these things?
It is. Yeah. Thank you for that little trip down memory lane.
You're welcome.
But I do think I have, to the extent balance, I think balance is a funny word, right? I mean, it's not about balance. It's about making sure that the time that you spend is time that aligns with the things that you value to the extent possible. We all have to do things that aren't our favorite things to do, but the pandemic really got me thinking about how much time I spent in transit to various things, right? And, could I do some of those things differently? Could I do some of those things from my house? How could I buy more time back? And I think there are things that I won't pick back up, when all of this goes back to whatever it'll be. Because I don't like rushing around all the time, and I feel like I ended up back in a place of more rushing around. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. I have one last question for you before I open it up to our audience.
Sure.
So, for yourself, and I mean, we've been talking about reinvention, and it's come up in the book, it's come up in your personal life, and you came to writing a little bit later in life as
Yeah.
well. So it's no surprise to me that your books generally focus a little bit around these characters in their 40s. They're going through some sort of reinvention or not. But would you say that, in your 40s if there is a perfect time to reinvent yourself, is
Oh.
it then? Or if not then, when is it?
So I actually, this may be a radical point of view, but I actually think, you know, there's a sort of a societal kind of mantra that like people don't change, right? We have this thing like, you figure someone out, that's who they are, they never change. And my own view is that people change all the time. We are like changing constantly. And that um, when we get stuck, it's because we have this anxiety about change. Like we don't really see change as being kind of normal and natural, and that people come into our lives, people fall out of our lives. Like we hold on to stuff, right? We hold on to careers that we started, we hold on to friendships, maybe we've outgrown, we hold on to relationships, and we hold on to um, ideas about ourselves that can be quite limiting. And so I find that I've had some really big life transitions that have kind of shaken me loose from this idea that, like you got to hold on to the stuff you've built, because I just think, I've had a lot of careers now. I've had two marriages. I've had lots of other relationships. I've had tons of friends. Some have stayed for life. Some have come, some have gone. Children grow up, people die. So I think there's something about being in your middle years where that reality kind of comes home to roost and you think, okay, I can't hold this thing in a static way. And then you get a little more relaxed about moving through changes and getting and sort of embracing transitions. Having said that, I think any time of life is a great time for a transition, and I wish I'd done more of it earlier. I did some earlier, but I also think I was sort of caught up in this idea that you kind of like just kept building in one path in one direction, and you kind of consolidated your gains and kept going on that route. And I just don't really see it that way anymore. But I think you see a lot of life transitions in your 40s because people are just, like unclenching a bit about this idea. Sometimes change just is visited upon you, right? And then generally you get a little less anxious about change more generally. But I also think people kind of come to a realization in their 40s that like, if there are things I want to do, I don't know how long I have to do them because, people get unlucky. Sometimes your health doesn't permit it. Sometimes you don't know what's around the corner. You might be fine, but you might have to take care of a parent or a child so if you find yourself in a moment where you have the space to take on a new challenge, that's the time to do it, right? If you find that you're facing a moment, there's something you want to do and you have the bandwidth to do it, or you can make the bandwidth to do it, then that's exactly when you should do it. It so happens a lot of those moments happen in the 40s, but I think it's just because there are other factors around people that kind of bring them to that realization that they should and they can um, transition to in different ways in their lives.
That's fantastic. It's a great outlook too. I think you're going to make a great psychotherapist, by the way.
Oh, well, that's kind of a mistake. We're
Talking about
supposed to be more listening
change
and less talking, but I appreciate the endorsement.
Oh, that's great. So, okay, like theoretically, you've gone through a lot of change. If you had to reinvent yourself point blank again, you've had a lot of careers. Let's say, your next book is just it's the best thing since sliced bread. You never have to write again. You don't want to write again. What do you do?
So I think I'll always do some writing because I really it's not about the money. I mean, no one writes for the money. I mean, it's nice if money comes, that's lovely. But like, let me disabuse you of the fact that I'm getting really rich after this. I just love doing it, right? So if I weren't writing novels, I might try my hand at writing poetry or a screenplay, or if I didn't, if it didn't matter if I ever sold anything, I would probably just experiment with different styles of writing and maybe I try to write my own TV show, or maybe I'll do that anyway, or as I say, write some poetry or do something else. And then you know I I mean, psychotherapy is kind of a lifelong interest that I've just started pursuing. So I'm 3 years into a 5-year program, and I just really enjoy it. It's totally interesting to me. I've always had a fascination with the human psyche. So I'm at the beginning of that. So for me, it's like quite exciting, the prospect of spending kind of 10 years developing that, that career, but or more. So yeah, I mean, I do feel like I'm still transitioning all the time. I'm in a fairly new marriage. I've been married for 3 years. So there are a lot of things in my life that are kind of new. And I like that. Yeah.
I can tell. Starting a new education and a new ambition. You're that person who just you're looking for new challenges all the time, and
I do.
I think that's really
Like
amazing.
I like growing. I like learning. I'm really a lifelong learner. So I do really like feeling, I guess I'm kind of like hooked on that feeling you get when your brain is really working hard to process new information, and some people don't like that because it's hard and tiring and whatever, but I've always really gotten off on that. So the only thing I really can't stand is being bored. So
Fair enough. Well, Kate, I'm going to open it up to some audience questions. So if anybody in the audience has any questions for Kate, please type it into the Q&A. I've seen two in there already. It's just myself that can see these, so it doesn't show up for the rest of the audience members. So feel free to put your questions in there. Kate, the first question we have comes from Wendy, and she is very interested in a writer's writing process. So she would like to know, are you a plotter? Were you a pantser, and how much outlining do you actually do?
I am a hardcore plotter. Yeah. I write a very thorough outline before I start any writing project, and I always know how it ends before I start. In fact, with my first 3 books, the one part that never changed in all of the drafts was the ending. The ending was the last couple of pages of the book were the last couple of pages of the book, and they didn't change. So, which is not to say that all kinds of things in the book don't change over the course of the drafts, but the core story arc remains the same, and kind of what the book is about stays the same. And then so I usually start with kind of a standard outline of about 30 chapters. And yeah, I don't start writing anything until I've filled it in. And then it does evolve as I get to know the characters better and kind of understand what they're doing. And of course, in the second draft, all of that goes out the window, and you really are I'm doing a second draft now, and I'm kind of reworking the original outline with sort of revised descriptions so that I know exactly how I'm reworking every chapter. But it's the same outline. It just it's getting sort of a facelift. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Actually, we had two exact same questions come in for that, so that was a good one.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I
Um,
know really fabulous writers that I am crazy about, and I love their writing, who are the exact opposite, like who start on page one of a 500-page novel and just start going. And, I am, that makes me anxious.
Fair
Yeah,
enough. Fair
yeah.
enough. We have a question here from Joan who wants to know. She says each chapter is about a different person or from a different person's point of view. Did you have a reason for choosing this style?
So yes, I had a variety of reasons. One was that I wanted to, as I said, show kind of different aspects of life transitions, and it's easier to kind of do that from inside a person's head. So understanding kind of different three different people facing kind of a really different type of life transition, and watching how each one of them navigates that and comes out the other side. So fundamentally, I wanted the experience of the reader to be a hopeful one, to kind of experience in three different ways kind of a life falling apart and coming back together, and to kind of come to the end of that book and feel like, no matter what it is in my own life that I need to transition through, my story can also be rewritten kind of the other side. So I wanted to give people kind of a choose your own adventure in that sense. But also, it's partly to do with the experience of sitting in the chair of the writer, is that you know you want the experience of writing the book to be really interesting to you, right? And to challenge yourself and to learn new things. And so for me, that was a more ambitious structure than I've done before. I wanted to kind of explore that. I wanted to try that out. Um, to write in different voices. I've played with time in other books and written kind of the same characters from different ages and so on. But I've never had kind of three kind of distinctive voices in a book. And so that was a fun challenge for me. And then I also just, I mean, I didn't intend to do that when I started the book, but it evolved that way, where I felt strongly that other voices deserve space in the book. So yeah, it kind of just took shape that way as I worked through it. And I'll rewrite an outline many times. So yeah, it just, when I settled on an outline that had different points of view, it just had that kind of tuning fork feeling to it. That was the right choice for this book. But you sometimes as a writer really have to experiment a little bit with that before you get that feeling of things clicking into place.
Great. Another question from Nancy. She wants to know, you have so many interests in a very busy life. How do you carve out time for writing?
Oh, it's so funny. So my stepdaughter and my son go to the same school, and they're both taking the same writer's craft class right now. And I was working out in the basement. I could hear the class going on, and the teacher was talking about all of the different like writing habits of famous writers. So they got up at like 4 a.m. and did all these things. Kind of like started laughing. So, and I have friends, like I have very good friends, for example, with Karma Brown and Laurie Petru, who are like signature, and I think Marissa Stapley now is also in this club, the 5 a.m. Writers Club. It's this whole group of writers who get up, and on Twitter they're in the 5 a.m. Writers Club, and they've like written 5 hours of work before I even hit my desk in the morning. And so everyone has their own way of doing this. I feel that I kind of depending on what stage I'm at in a piece of work, like I don't if I'm in between projects, I work much more haphazardly than, for example, if I'm like working to a deadline trying to finish a draft. So if I'm really in a project and working towards a deadline, then I'm trying to write 3 good hours a day, really solid, uninterrupted hours. That's been really hard in the pandemic because I have literally 5 people plus a dog in my house all the time. Everyone's here all the time. Everyone's working on the internet at the same time. Everyone's, like, Mom, have you seen the Band-Aids? And like, it's just, it's the worst conditions for writing. Absolutely the worst. And I have friends who are alone in their apartments and they're lonely. And I think, we should really trade places because I'm like whatever the opposite of lonely is, I'm that, and I love them all so much, but it's not great conditions for writing. So I often will write kind of from, 10 to noon tends to be kind of a chunk of time where people are in class, the dog's been walked, like there isn't a lot going on, and then I can usually find another hour in the afternoon or in the evening. So but that's kind of, I like the writing space time is such kind of quiet time that it's harder to find it right now. When the kids go to school, the obvious thing is like you drop them at school and then you come home and you sit down at the desk and you've got like a straight shot through the middle of the day till you have to go get them again. That's like perfect. That's wonderful. But I haven't had those conditions for a while. So yeah. But the
Well, it's the story of everybody's life, right?
But the important thing is not really what I do. It's like what works for you, right? If you're a writer. So when I did my first book, I wrote, I was working full time. I hired a babysitter. I wrote for 3 hours on Sunday afternoons, just once a week. And I was able ultimately to produce a manuscript. So it's really about what you can commit to and what works for you with your temperament and your sleep schedule and your kids and whatever. But as long as you can kind of figure out how to do it on the regular, in a way that makes sense to you, then, then you will produce something over time. So.
One last question for you before we let you go for the evening, Kate. Jane wants to know if writing comedy comes naturally to you.
Writing, okay, and I see these other questions, so I'm gonna answer some of them really fast, and then I'm gonna come back to writing comedy. So how do I choose names for my characters from Lana? Okay, that's like the hardest thing I do. I'm terrible at naming characters. I actually now have to keep a list that I had a teenager read all of my books and keep a spreadsheet of all of my characters so I don't name characters the same names in all of my books. It's actually something I'm terrible at. I think it's like one of my great weaknesses. I have so much trouble naming characters. Heather Hawken, hello, Heather Hawken. Heather Hawken was the mother of my very best friend in elementary school and beyond. So I'm just sending a special hello out to Heather and a big hug. My best defined male in the book is Oscar. Is that because I have teenage sons? Yes, very probably it is. I was trying to do justice to that kind of teenage experience, which is sort of a complex moment in life. And Heather knows, grew up with sisters. And so I feel constantly in my own household like an anthropologist. Does writing comedy come naturally to me? Yes, because I'm hilarious.
Yes, and it's very honest too.
I have kind of I have a wry kind of way of approaching the world. And I think, every writer has to find her own voice. And it took a few tries to kind of get mine. So I like reading all kinds of things, but kind of trying to figure out what your voice is on the page is kind of its own journey. And it just so happened that it just seemed that writing sort of in a slightly satirical way was the right voice for me, at least in my first 3 books. I'm actually departing completely from that in my next 2, but I do see the world as kind of a Black comedy. So I think that it does sort of come naturally to me to have that tone. Yeah.
That's great. And did you want to take a shot on what are you currently reading before?
Oh my gosh, can you see like my to read pile is gonna fall over and kill me. It's like very high. So if you follow me on Instagram, I always post what I'm reading. So if you're curious about what I'm reading, you can follow me there. But so I read a ton. I read the moment I just did a big order of poetry because I was feeling that my attention span wasn't great. So I have a bunch of stuff on my just bought a new book by Ellen Bass, who's a poet that I like. And I'm reading quite a bit of, I always read a lot of nonfiction, but because I'm in this psychotherapy program, I'm actually reading a lot of psychological literature and kind of self-help on the sort of neuroscience side. So I just finished reading The Body Keeps the Score, which is about trauma and cognitive science. It's a very interesting book. And I read a lot of work by Canadian and American women, literary work. So I just read Hamnet and Judith by Maggie O'Farrell, which I loved. I just like blew the doors off. I thought it was incredible. Really recommend that. And I'm about to read on my list right now at the top there is a book called Trust Exercise by Sue Choi, which I think won the National Book Award in the US a couple years back, but I missed it at the time. But anyway, we can give that a spin. And another recent favorite was Kirky by Madeline Miller, who's an American writer. It's like a reimagining of the myth of Kirky. And then, of course, like I'm, in a writing group with all of these incredible women. I just want to do a shout out to them. We call ourselves the Coven, but like Liz Renzetti and Jen Robson, who writes historical fiction, and Karma Brown had a great book this year called Recipe for a Perfect Wife, which a lot of you have probably read. And Carrie Clare had a great book this year called Waiting for a Star to Fall. And Chantel Gurton has a new book called Instamom coming out. She got a really great deal for that. And I think it'll be amazing. And I feel like I've probably missed someone. Marissa Stapley's new book, Lucky, is out, and it's terrific. So, I mean, I just think anything by any of those women is always worth reading. So I'm a big fan.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kate, for taking time out of your busy life and making us the last stop on this book tour, this virtual living room book tour. And yeah, sharing
my pleasure.
yourself with us. It's always lovely to learn more about the actual writer behind the books. So if you haven't had a chance to check out Kate's latest book, Better Luck Next Time, I can guarantee you can get it from your local library. So make sure you check it out.
Thank you so much, Courtney. This was really fun.
Yeah. And don't forget, for our audience, we do this once a month. So make sure you call the library and get your name on the list for our once a month author event. So hopefully we'll see you next time. Kate, thank you again. Best of luck with your psychotherapy, your next second draft. I can't wait to see what you've got coming out next.
It's a historical mystery. It'd be a departure, but I think it's going to be really fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was good. Thanks to so many familiar faces for dropping in. I'm very touched and look forward to being back up in the North Country soon. Miss you all.
Have a good